Today we're looking at the properties of water. This is chapter 2 in your textbook, section 2. I would like you to view the Untamed Science video, Not a Drop of Water. It can be found at www.biology.com. Well, can you draw the structure of a water molecule? Here's an example of one way to draw it. We have an oxygen and two hydrogens. So that means that the formula for water is H2O. Water is a molecule that has covalent bonds, and it's also polar. So why do we need to learn about water? Well, in order for living things to live, water is necessary. It helps to carry out all the reactions in our cells, and that's why it is so connected so strongly to living things. They think that as long as if there's water found on a planet, then they believe that there will be living things on that planet. So that's why they believe that there may be living organisms on Mars. Now, water is a compound and is mainly found as a liquid on Earth. There are some places where it's a solid, if you think like the North Pole and places like that, and some very hot places where it may be found as steam or as a gas. Like a lot of other molecules, water is considered neutral. Okay, so it doesn't have a positive charge or a negative charge as far as water, the molecule itself. Do you know how many electrons and protons a water molecule has? Well, it has 8 electrons and 8 protons. Oxygen starts off with 6. Each hydrogen starts off with 1, and they share 2. Let's talk a little bit about polarity and what it means to be polar. Well, since oxygen has 8 protons in its nucleus, it's a much bigger atom than hydrogen is. And since it is a bigger atom than the hydrogens are, it is able to hold the electrons that it's sharing a little bit tighter than the hydrogens do. Now, you remember that electrons have a negative charge. So if the electrons are closer to oxygen, oxygen will have a slightly negative charge. And if the electrons are a little bit further from the hydrogens will have a slightly positive charge. When you're looking at a molecule that has uneven charges, it's said to be polar. So a slightly negative end, and it has a slightly positive end. Now, if the charges are evenly distributed, the molecule is said to be nonpolar. An example of molecules that are nonpolar would be gasoline, paint thinner, paint, the liquid that's in Sharpie markers, things like that would be considered nonpolar. Other molecules that are polar, salt is polar, sugar is polar. Anything that dissolves in water would be considered polar. And everything that does not dissolve in water would be considered nonpolar. Now, because water molecules are polar, they can do what is called hydrogen bonding. And basically what this is when you have an attraction between a hydrogen atom on one water molecule to the oxygen atom on another water molecule. Now understand that this hydrogen bonding can occur between hydrogen and a couple other atoms such as nitrogen, carbon, sulfur, phosphorus. Now, since water is able to form multiple hydrogen bonds, that allows the water molecules to connect in a special kind of way. So this hydrogen bonding are not as strong as covalent or ionic bonds, and they can form in other compounds besides water, like I had said. Now, because of the hydrogen bonding, water molecules have a property that is called cohesion. One of the properties of water is called cohesion, and that's when you have an attraction between molecules of the same substance. So in this case, we're talking about water being attached to water or attracted to water. And because of cohesion, this is why water molecules can stick together or form drops, or these little beads. Cohesion also produces what is called surface tension. So with the molecules sticking together, it takes a lot to break a drop of water. And so some types of insects are able to walk on water. Water also has another property called adhesion, and that's the attraction between water and other surfaces. That's why water can stick to the wall, it can stick to glass, it sticks to your skin. That's called adhesion. So in this picture here, I have a graduated cylinder, and you notice where the meniscus is. So why does the meniscus form? Well, the reason why the meniscus forms is because you have an attraction between the water and the glass on the sides, and then you have cohesion in the middle. Well, this adhesion is actually a little bit stronger than cohesion. And so therefore, you have the water kind of pulling away from the center, and it sticks to the sides of the glass on the grad. Oops, sorry. Other examples of adhesion would be capillary action. And in this case, this is where the water in a glass rises against the force of gravity. Capillary action is what pulls water out of the roots of a plant and up the stems and into the leaves. One way you can try capillary action is if you take a straw, stick it in your drink, put your finger over the open end of the straw, and keeping it there, pull the straw out, and the water will still, or the liquid actually, will still be inside the straw. Capillary action can also be seen with a paper towel, and you touch it to a liquid and the liquid will be drawn up into the paper towel. Another characteristic of water is that it has a high specific heat capacity. A high specific heat capacity, or high heat capacity, means the same thing. And basically what the heat capacity of a substance is how much heat is required to raise the temperature of that substance. And actually it takes a lot of heat in order to raise the temperature of water. And because it can do this, water has a high heat capacity, it helps to maintain homeostasis in the body, keep the body the same temperature. So think a little bit and think about why or how is water's high heat capacity an advantage for sea animals and plants? Well, it protects organisms that live in the water from drastic changes in temperature. So if the water, it will take a lot of heat for the temperature in the ocean to warm up, just like it takes a lot of cold or lack of heat for the temperature to drop. How does the structure of water contribute to its unique properties? Well, what are the structure of water? What do we know about the structure of water, first of all? We know that it's polar, and we know that it can form multiple hydrogen bonds. Do you remember, or did I say how many hydrogen bonds it can form? Well, it can form 4 hydrogen bonds. So because it's polar and it's able to form hydrogen bonds, that is what causes it or allows it to have many special properties. And what were those properties? We had cohesion, we had adhesion, we had capillary action, and we had high heat capacity. Now, when we're looking at water in the body, it's not found pure. A lot of times it's going to be part of a mixture. And do you remember what a mixture is? Okay. Well, living things are in part composed of mixtures that involve water. And 2 types of mixtures that can be made with water are solutions and suspensions. So a solution is formed when? when you have two different molecules or two different types of molecules, and one completely dissolves in the other one. In this case, water will be the substance that does not dissolve. In this case, we have sodium chloride, which will dissolve in the water. Now, salt or table salt, the formula for table salt is going to be NaCl, or sodium chloride. And basically what happens is sodium chloride is an ion or an ionic compound, and if it's an ionic compound, it's polar. And remember what I said earlier, if it's polar, it will dissolve in water. So with the salt or the sodium chloride, sodium is the positive part, chlorine is the negative part. So on water, what part will the sodium be attracted to? What part will the chlorine be attracted to? Well, since the sodium is positive, it will be attracted to the oxygen, which is slightly negative, and the chlorine will be attracted to the hydrogen, because the chlorine is negative, and remember the hydrogen was slightly positive. And when these ions break apart, or the ionic compound breaks apart into ions, Na plus and Cl minus, that's when the solution is formed, when it's totally dissolved in the water. Now in a solution, we know that the components are evenly distributed. And there's two parts to a solution. You have what's called the solute and the solvent. The solute is the substance that is dissolved. The solute is the substance that is dissolved. And the solvent is the substance in which the solute dissolves. So in this case, it's called water. The solvent will be water. Salt will be the solute. And because water is able to dissolve lots and lots and lots of substances, it is called the universal solvent. For the most part, if you need to dissolve something, water is what you will use. Remember, water is called the universal solvent because it's able to dissolve many, many things. So water can dissolve ionic compounds, which are polar, and polar molecules. It can also dissolve salts, sugars, minerals, gases. Think about a soda, a carbonated beverage. When it goes flat, that's because all the carbonation has been dissolved in the water. Another type of mixture that water can form is a suspension. Basically, a suspension is a mixture where the little pieces don't dissolve and they're kind of floating around in the water. An example of a suspension could be muddy water. It could be Italian dressing, like after you shake it up and the little pieces are floating around in there. Those are examples of suspensions. Blood is actually a suspension and a solution. It's about the blood in your body. So blood is mostly water, and it contains many dissolved compounds, but it also has ions and stuff in your blood. But there's also undissolved ones, such as the white blood cells, platelets, and red blood cells. And so the way they get those out is like say they take blood from you, they put it in a test tube, they then spin it in a centrifuge, and that helps the particles to settle out. So how does water's polarity influence its properties as a solvent? Okay, since it is able to dissolve ionic compounds and other polar molecules. And why can it dissolve ionic compounds and other polar molecules? Because it's polar. Now, water molecules sometimes split apart, and they form what are called hydrogen ions, that's your H+, and hydroxide ions, that's your OH-. Hydrogen ions are H+, hydroxide ions are OH-. So look at the reaction for a second here. So you've got water, and it's, you notice the arrow goes both ways. That means that water can come together or it can be split apart into hydrogen ions and hydroxide ions. So because the number of hydrogen ions, which are positive, and the negative hydroxide ions produced are equal in numbers, water is considered neutral. And do you remember what the pH for neutral is? It's 7. So when we look at the pH scale indicates the concentration of hydrogen ions in solution. And this pH scale ranges from 0 to 14. 7 being neutral, and that's when you have an equal amount of hydrogen ions and hydroxide ions. Acids would have a pH below 7, and they have more hydrogen ions than hydroxide ions. The lower the pH, the stronger the acid. For bases, they have a pH above 7, and they have more hydroxide ions than hydrogen ions. And the higher the pH, the stronger the base. As far as the pH scale itself, it's a logarithmic scale, and each number on the pH scale represents a factor of 10. So for example, a liter of some solution that had a pH of 4 would be 10 times stronger or have 10 times as many hydrogen ions as a liter of a solution with a pH of 5. So let's review again. An acid forms hydrogen ions. The hydrogen ion concentration is greater than the hydroxide concentration. The pH value is going to be below 7. The lower the number, the stronger the acid. And hydrochloric acid, which is produced by your stomach, would be an example of a strong acid. Bases will produce hydroxide ions. Another name for a base is alkaline solution. And it will have less concentrations of hydrogen ions than pure water. The pH value is above 7. And if it goes from like maybe 11, 12, 13, 14, those would be considered a strong base. An example is sodium hydroxide, NaOH. So in your body, the pH should generally be kept between 6.5 and 7.5. And obviously, if you get closer you get to 6.5 or the closer you get to 7, the more chance of dying. Okay? But it needs to be like, I'm thinking around 7, 7.2, 7.4 in order to maintain homeostasis. So controlling pH can be done with compounds that are called buffers. And a buffer is a weak acid or a weak base that reacts with strong acids or strong bases to prevent changes in pH or sudden extreme changes in pH. So for instance, if you have a strong acid, you would add a weak base to it to keep the pH about the same. Or if you had a strong base, you would add a weak acid to it to keep the pH about the same. So if you add acid to a solution, it'll cause the pH to drop. But if the buffer's in there and you add the acid, it will only cause a slight change in pH. So if you had an acid, what type of buffer would you need? You'd need a weak base or a buffered base. So why is it important for the body to be able to buffer the blood and other solution, in your body against rapid changes in pH? Well, I've given you a picture here of someone exercising, and it kind of tells you what happens to the blood. Oxygen is used up, carbon dioxide is produced. Carbon dioxide produced, that lowers the pH. Hydrogen ions are produced, that lowers the pH. Lactic acid is produced, that lowers the pH. And then your temperature also increases when you exercise. So your kidneys and lungs are the main things that have the buffers, or rather are able to keep the pH of the blood constant. Most books I've read say around 7.4 is what the blood needs to be. So why is it important again? Buffers dissolved in life's fluids play an important role in maintaining homeostasis in organisms. Okay, so buffers against these rapid changes in pH. Don't forget to look at the video in biology.com. What you do is you go to the chapter 2 section, and then the video should be there.